Hey guys, so in this video I'm gonna walk you through the way that I think about React components. And this may feel a little bit weird to you if you're coming from, other programming languages. Maybe you have a background in more server-side oriented stuff. And if you know what I'm saying when I'm saying MVC, then this is the video for you. Because the thing is that as I progressed through my career, I've realized that MVC is a great, awesome thing for at the conceptual level, and I think that when it comes to React, we should think a little bit differently, and it's been working out very well. To give you a bit of reference, I actually started doing this when I was working at Ticketmaster and transitioned their code base into this system of working, and it has been working out very well. And now I work at another company that is, admittedly a little bit smaller, but still, and they kind of took these practices to heart as well, and they are now incorporating these practices as well. Like, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who's doing this, but hopefully this video will show you a little bit of how maybe you could change the way that you're writing your React components. All right, so let's start out by just looking at the Webpack config. So just for completeness sake, it's nothing fancy at all. Like, it's just ES6 and React, and basically it's going to produce a bundle. And then just let's quickly look at the application. This is the most basic application in the world, or rather the most basic thing that I could think of that has more than one component and requires a Redux store or something like that. So basically all it is that it's a list that will... I have not done absolutely nothing here, because the idea of this video is not to show you how to make a very nice application. It's more about thinking about how to structure React applications. Right. So that's all it does. It filters a static list of elements. So let's get into the more nitty-gritty stuff. So we have our HTML, which is basically just a div with the ID of container and a bundle. Easy peasy stuff. Then we have our store, and the store is importing two types of reducers, which is going to hold the state of the to-do list and the search field. Easy peasy. And we also use, this is a big tip for you if you don't know about this, there is an amazing plugin. Let's take a look at that. The Redux plugin for Chrome is probably the most important plugin that there is. Like, I use this all the time when I work. It is so nice. It is. I can't even begin to describe how amazing it is. So when you're using Redux, you see all these stage transitions, and you can actually see what the different properties on. As you could see here, to-do list and search field, these are actually, as you can see, these are my states. And, oh sorry, by just import this line here is where all the magic is happening. With this plugin and this line here, you get this functionality, and you can actually see all the actions that are dispatched through Redux, and it's just an overall. This requires an entire video in of itself, so I'm not going to get too far into it, but let's just say that that's a very useful tool to use in tandem with the React plugin that you can use for your Chrome browser. Anywho, this is the store basically. So let's look at the main file. This is where our application's bootstrapping is actually happening. So as you can see here, we're importing React DOM. This is fairly standard. We include the store that we just looked at, and then we have React Redux, like basically just with a provider so that we can inject the store into our application. And then we have this import here. Components to-do list app, and then we just import the to-do list application, and we inject it, render it into the container element, and that's where we're getting this application right here. Okay, cool. So now we know the absolute bare bone basics of this. Let's get into a bit of semantics and a bit of the actual structuring of this. So in my components directory, because I only have a single application running, I simply have a folder called to-do list app. Now, traditionally what I see is people splitting their basically all their files into different areas. Like you have one, like in the MVC way of doing this, you would put something in a file, like a folder called reducers or ducks or something like that, and you could probably put something in a folder called container or components. Basically, you group things on at the concept, like the functionality or the conceptual level. And this is something that I argue that you shouldn't be doing. I think that you should have the approach that the node modules have. If you look at them in the node modules, the way that these dependencies that you have in node modules work is that each directory is basically just a library. So if I open this library here, it's everything that is associated with this library is inside of this folder, and the only contract between this folder and my project is that there's a package JSON that specifies, let's see here, we should have some type of entry here. I haven't actually rehearsed this ahead of time. There it is. Yeah, the main. So that's the contract. This is the way that my dependency, like my project, knows that, okay, this library, or like whoever's using this library, this is where I'm going to be able to enter this library and get the value that this library is providing. And this is a extremely powerful concept, and I like to actually do this in my own application development as well. So let's look at this one. I'm opening up my app, which is, as we saw, this entire thing. This is the entire app. So I have my index.js file, which is the entry point to my application. And here some things are happening. Now, my application has two components. It has the list and the search field. I've split these things into separate components, and then I have the actual component itself. And I import these things, and then I export basically the things that I want to publicly expose. If you're coming from like Java or C# or any like these classical type languages, to me this is encapsulation at the directory level. So I'm only exposing the things through my entry point that that whoever's on the outside or whoever's going to depend on my library needs. And if we look at the store here, are you noticing something? I'm not specifying any file or anything inside of my library. I'm simply using destructuring to pull out the to-do list reducer and the search field reducer, which is exactly what I'm exposing here, because I know that these two reducers are critical in order for my application to work, so that whoever is wiring up their Redux store can access these things. Easy peasy. And then I actually expose, of course, I expose the app itself, which is what's being required here. That's how you're fetching this. Now, this pattern of destructuring different components that is being exported through the library is very, I'm not saying common, but the best example I can give you of how this, where you see this type of exporting, is in the React router package. Go and check that out if you haven't. It's a really, really cool library. Anywho, so this is my entry point, and now let's look at the components itself. It's super simple. You include a provider and React, of course, and then I import the to-do list and the search field. And then I just wrap those in a div, and here are my two components, and then I export it. Easy peasy. This is a standard, this is the top level component in my React application. So let's go one further. Now, this is my entire application. This is my library. And my library has its own dependencies, which is like nested components that is inside of this component directory. And now we apply the same mentality that we just applied to these components. Like, I'm not splitting anything up. Every single component is its own library. So let's do search field first, because it's simpler. Open the search field. The contract is still the same. There's an index file that is responsible for exporting everything that I want to be publicly available in my directory. And what I want my user to, like the consumer of my library, to have access to is the search field, and I like the actual components itself, and I also wanted to be able to hook into the reducer, because my component needs to have a reducer, so I need to be able to wire it up in the store, so that that's basically how Redux works. I'm not going to talk too much about Redux. Hopefully you have some prior knowledge of it. Otherwise, leave a comment and I'll gladly teach you all about Redux. It's absolutely amazing. So let's look at the component. This is a very simple component. It imports React, and then it takes a value and a set value function. It's just an input with a placeholder text of search, and then you have the value like that on change, which is going to run with the set value function, and then it's export, and then there's an export. This is fairly, if you're working with Redux, this is fairly boilerplate stuff. So we import the connect search, and we import the component that we just saw. We have our actions, which is going to include a set value function, and then we have this little thing which is called filter, basically filter list. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Then we use my absolute favorite function in the whole wide world, which is get. So let's map the state to props, which is going to basically the state is going with the get function. We're going to grab the value that is in the search field, and if it's not there, we'll simply return a empty string. As you saw earlier, the value that you saw there, that's exactly what's being put into the component here. Okay, cool. So then we have the dispatch where the functions are living, and so set value is that function we saw just a moment ago, this function here. So we're gonna, whenever somebody types something into the field, we're going to dispatch set value with whatever is inside of our field, and then we're going to filter the list that we saw earlier. So basically what's happening is that whenever I'm typing something into this search box here, that event that function that we just saw is being fired, and it's filtering the list so that all items that are not matching the text that I'm typing in are filtered away from the list. That's it. And then finally we connect these two functions and with the search field, and we're left with this wrapped component. Like, this is Redux specific stuff, but hopefully it makes sense to you. And here's my reducer, simple, with the initial state is an empty value, and then we grab the type and the value from the action. And basically there's a single action that is saying set value. So if a dispatch happens and the set value property is the type of set value is found, then we simply set the value like this. Easy peasy. Okay, so we also have the actions, which is basically just going to have included a single function and one label, if you will, which is called set value. And that's all it's exporting. It's basically just an object with a value and a type, which is used in pretty much a single place, which is this reducer here. That label is over here, and the function itself is, as you could see, here. Yeah, so those are the only two places it's being used. So what's powerful about this is that now all of because I put a folder around my component, I have centralized everything into a single directory. I am now free to do whatever I want. I can structure my library or my React component in any way I want. I can do anything. I can add as many files as I want. If something's getting too big, I can add my tests. I can do anything. And the consumer of my little library here doesn't care. It doesn't matter what I'm doing internally in this folder. All I need to do is to export the component and its reducer, and that's the end of the story. Whoever is depending on this folder doesn't need to know what's going on inside of my library. All they care about is that it works. So let's look at a slightly more advanced example with the to-do list, because it's a bigger component. So once again, the contract stays true. We have an index file. We export the component, its reducer, and we also export this filter list function, or rather this action basically. And that's what you saw earlier in the search field here. So, yeah. This component is depending on this filter list action because we need to communicate between these two components basically. That's what's happening there. So yeah, that's the index file. Let's look at the actions. Simple stuff. You have a filter list action that's being dispatched with a label and a value. In the reducer it has I hope this is fairly simple stuff. We have some mock data, or these are the items that you're seeing in this list basically. and a single case which is called filter list. And basically what's happening here is that we're going to the state, grabbing list items. If we don't find them, we'll simply return an empty array. Then we do a safe copy of the state, and basically we use this filtered items function. We're going to look at that in just a moment, to filter out all the things that are not matching the value that's being provided through the action. And this value is, as we saw earlier, just what I'm typing into the search box. Okay, let's look at the filters function. So the filters function is it's just a fairly simple function. It takes in the list items and a string. It checks if the list items is not an array. We simply return an empty array because we don't want to deal with things that aren't the thing that we're looking for. And then we filter over the list items. We look at each item and we check, okay, is it not, if the item isn't a string, we simply return false, which means that that item is not going to be included into the result set that we're going to get. And then finally we create a regex and we check, is this thing that we're testing against, this item, does it start with the string that we are providing? That's the entire function. Now, some people would argue that this function should go into like the reducer itself. Like some people would like to put it here, but in my experience, the problem when you put like the reducer gets really to me, it's very important that the reducer stays as dumb as possible. To me, a reducer should simply be a way of changing state, to mutating the state that Redux uses in order to, to display things to the screen. And I don't see why, to me, it's more effective to simply keep these abstractions and like functions and so forth that do all this logic as an external thing, and I'll show you why in just a moment. And apart from this, we have the component, which is just this basic, an unordered list that is going to iterate over the list items that it's being provided with. We're doing some validation checking here just to make sure that list items are actually, in fact an array. And then we map over them, and then we return a custom component called to-do list item with a key and an index. Like this is fairly standard like React stuff, so I'm not going to dive too much into that. And then we have the container, which is going to just have a single property called list items, which is going to be that array of filtered list items that we saw earlier. And that's basically the entire component. Now, this component in of itself has this to-do list items, which is also a very trivial component, but I hope you see the red thread here. We still have the index.js file. It's still the entry point into this library. So when I'm importing, if we saw earlier, this to-do list item that I'm importing is now coming. It repeats this pattern of just basically not going into what files are inside of the directory, just going to the index file itself and just trusting that the library has been standardized in like in this way that I've been describing so far. It's very powerful because it abstracts away the specifics of how the library works internally. That is extremely important. Like for this to work in a nice way, this is extremely important. Hopefully you're following along. But let's get back to the code. So this component, all it does is, it's a very dumb component. It's just exporting a single component, and it's just a list item which takes in some type of text or a child or whatever, and puts it between two list item elements and returns it. All right, cool. So this is fairly standard now. Right. You may have noticed this folder here. So what's this? Well, these are my tests for the filtering function, because we're responsible developers and we want to test our code. And even the tests, traditionally in MVC, what you would do is you would put these tests in a test directory. And I argue that you shouldn't be doing this. If you're truly modular, and if you truly designed your components as a library, everything that is associated with it should be in the directory, or the library directory itself. You shouldn't spread your code around. centralize everything that is related to the thing that you're building. Because what's beautiful about this is if I remove this to-do list component, I don't need it anymore, then everything that is associated with it is gone with it. But if I have spread around all my files all over the place, all of a sudden I have to remember to remove the tests, I need to remove the component, the container, all of these things. And that's not ideal. So, that's at least the way I feel about it. So here we are, we're just walking through the tests. So filter items returns a matching list item. And so we have a list of 2 items, and we expect one of them to be the match, and basically we give it to the list and a string which we want to match against, and we expect it to return the thing that we're looking for, basically. So let's see if I can run this. Yeah, all my tests are passing. So the next test is returns a partial matching list item, because we expect to, as you remember earlier, the regex is going to check if the string that we're providing, like the items in the list, or that the string that we're providing, it is each item within that list starting with that provided string. So if I give it an F and we have a list of foo and bar, then we expect, since foo is starting with F, we expect that to be returned, but we don't expect bar to be returned because it starts with a B. And as you can see, all the tests are passing. Okay, and then the final thing is does not return an incorrect partial matching. So if I give it this function a C, well, foo and bar, none of them start with a C, so we expect there to be an empty array. And yeah, we're getting those results. So I'm getting too I'm a little bit too in depth about the code now, and a little bit. Let's just take one step back and talk about the general idea here. So hopefully this video has showed you my way of thinking about React components, because what's very beautiful, what I find very elegant about this is that if I wanted to make a npm package of this to-do list application, this to-do list directory, I could. Like immediately, even search field. Or if I just wanted to make to-do list app and like an npm package to make it an open source project, I could do that immediately, because I have not written my own code in a special way. And that's what I want you to take away from this. I want you to ask the question, if you are writing your React components in an MVC fashion in your own project, question that. Why are you writing your code in a different manner than what people who are creating node modules are? Because this is, so far as we know, the best way to structure your libraries so that they can provide value to other people. And that's what my argument is. I think that you should think that way for your own projects as well. And I can only say that it has been working very nicely for me. I hope this video has given you some value. Have a nice day.